I didn't plan to shut down a luxury resort. I just wanted to cross my own bridge without needing a shovel and a therapy session. But when someone keeps burying the only road to your home under a frozen wall of snow, sooner or later you stop being polite and start getting creative. And yeah, by the time New Year's week rolled around, their guests were hauling Louis Vuitton suitcases through knee-deep powder because of me. So here's how that happened. I live in a small lakeside cottage, nothing fancy, just wood, stone, and a narrow bridge that connects me to the main access road. It's old but solid, built decades ago, and it's the only way in or out unless you feel like swimming across a freezing lake or hiking through dense forest in winter. And behind my place, up on the hill, there's this high-end resort. Think glass walls, heated patios, fire pits. The kind of place where people pay ridiculous money to disconnect from the world while still having 5-star room service. Now I don't bother them. They don't bother me. At least that's how it used to be. The first problem started early December, first big snowstorm of the season. I wake up before sunrise, step outside with my coffee, and I just stop. Actually freeze in place, not because of the cold, but because my bridge, my only access, is completely buried. Not lightly dusted, not a soft drift. I'm talking about a dense, gray, rock-solid pile of plowed road snow, the kind that's been compacted and refrozen, basically ice with attitude. And immediately I knew this wasn't natural. Snow doesn't just organize itself into a perfect wall right at the entrance of a bridge. This was deliberate, or at least careless enough to feel deliberate. So I spent the next 3 hours hacking through it, shovel, ice pick, whatever I had, just trying to clear enough space to walk across without slipping into the water, and the whole time I'm thinking, okay, new workers, bad visibility, maybe they didn't realize where the boundary was. It happens. I gave them the benefit of the doubt. That was mistake number 1. Because a week later, second storm hits. And guess what? Same exact thing, except worse. Way worse. This time the pile is heavier, denser, and it's pushed so hard against the side of the bridge that one of the wooden support rails actually snaps, like a clean crack. And now it's not just inconvenient, it's dangerous. And that's when the tone changed. I wasn't dealing with an accident anymore. This was a pattern. So I called the resort office, got transferred around a bit, eventually landed on their maintenance manager. Let's call him Kyle. Guy picks up sounding half annoyed already, like I'm interrupting something important, and I explain the situation calmly, very calmly. I tell him his plow crew is dumping snow directly onto my bridge, blocking my only access. And he pauses, not like he's surprised, more like he's deciding how much he cares. Then he goes, "Our crew stays within the designated turnaround zone." So I tell him, yeah, that turnaround zone ends right where my bridge begins. And without missing a beat, he says, "Then your bridge is built too close." I actually pulled the phone away for a second, just to make sure I heard that right. Because that's not an apology, that's not even denial, that's dismissal, clean and simple. Translation? Not our problem. And right there, that's when something clicks in your brain. You realize you're not dealing with someone who made a mistake. You're dealing with someone who thinks they can get away with it. So I hung up, didn't argue, didn't escalate, just noted it. Because when someone shows you exactly how they plan to play the game, the smartest move isn't to yell. It's to learn the rules better than they do. Next morning, I called a land survey team. Not cheap, not quick, but necessary, because at this point I needed facts, not assumptions. And 2 days later they're out there in the snow, marking boundaries, placing stakes, running measurements. And that's when things got interesting. Because it turns out, the problem wasn't just the snow. See, right behind the resort cabins, there's a service road. Looks like any other maintenance path. But according to the survey, that road, specifically the winter emergency access route, cuts across a narrow strip of land, my land, right before it reaches the area near my bridge. 5 feet wide. That's all it takes. 5 feet of my property, quietly being used as part of their infrastructure. And suddenly everything made sense. The snow dumping, the attitude, the refusal to adjust, they weren't just being careless, they were relying on that space. They needed it, especially in winter, and my bridge and trance just happened to sit right where their operations overlapped with land they didn't technically own. So I went back into the house, dug through old paperwork from the previous owner, boxes, folders, documents nobody had touched in years, and buried in there, I found it. A sign note, dated about 10 years back. It granted the resort temporary access across that exact strip of land during one specific winter season. Apparently, their upper road had washed out back then, and they needed a workaround. So the old owner said yes, temporarily. Temporary. That word matters more than people think, because it had an end date. And after that, no renewal, no extension, no permanent easement, nothing. Just expired permission. Which means everything they were doing now wasn't courtesy, wasn't misunderstanding, wasn't even gray area. It was trespassing, dressed up as routine. And now I finally understood why Kyle sounded so confident, because they'd been getting away with it for years. Until they didn't. All right, let's pause the story for a second, because this is where things get interesting. Not dramatic interesting, but this could cost someone 6 figures if they misunderstand it, kind of interesting. From a legal perspective, what the resort was trying to lean on is something called implied easement, or sometimes prescriptive easement. Basically the idea that if you've been using a piece of land openly, continuously, and without interruption for a long enough time, you might gain a legal right to keep using it, even if you don't technically own it. Sounds wild, but yeah, it's real. But here's the catch, and this is where they messed up. According to standard procedure, that kind of claim completely falls apart the moment there's documented permission involved, especially written permission with a clear expiration date. Because now it's no longer unauthorized continuous use, it's temporary allowed use. And once that permission ends, so does any legal argument that you somehow earned permanent access. And that little piece of paper I found, that wasn't just old paperwork, that was a legal kill switch. Now let's talk psychology for a second, because this wasn't just about land, it was about behavior. This is a psychological trap a lot of businesses fall into. When they've been doing something wrong for so long without consequences, their brain rewrites the story. They stop seeing it as, we're borrowing someone else's land, and start seeing it as, this is just how things work. It becomes normalized, baked into their operations, their routines, even their attitude. So when someone finally pushes back, it feels like an attack, not a correction. And that's exactly why Kyle responded the way he did, dismissive, confident, almost annoyed, because in his mind, I wasn't protecting my property, I was disrupting his system. The lesson here is, never confuse long-term convenience with legal right. Just because something's been happening for years doesn't mean it's allowed, it just means nobody stopped it yet. And once someone does, everything changes. So once I had that document in my hand, everything shifted, not emotionally. I wasn't angry anymore, not really, but strategically, because now it wasn't me versus a resort, it was me with leverage, and they didn't even realize it yet. I made copies of the survey results, copies of the old access agreement, highlighted the expiration date just to make it extra clear, and I sent everything over to the resort ownership group. Not Kyle, not maintenance, I went straight above him, because at this point I wasn't dealing with a snow problem, I was dealing with liability. And the message was simple, no drama, no threats, just facts, effective immediately. All crossing of my property stops, no more snow dumping, no more vehicle access, and they were responsible for repairing the damage to my bridge. Clean, direct, documented. Their lawyer responded fast, like suspiciously fast, which usually means one of two things. Either they already knew this was a problem, or they understood immediately how bad it could become. He tried to push the same angle I expected, long-term uninterrupted use, operational reliance, implied access, dressed it up with legal language to make it sound heavier than it actually was. But here's the thing. When your entire argument depends on ignoring a signed document with an expiration date, you're not building a case, you're stalling. My lawyer reviewed it, smiled, literally smiled, and said, yeah, no, this doesn't go anywhere. So we sent a second letter. Shorter this time. Sharper. Any future crossing of my property would be considered deliberate trespass. Not misunderstanding. Not operational necessity. Deliberate. That word carries weight. Because now it's no longer a gray area, it's intent. And intent changes everything in court. Kyle called me that same afternoon. Tone completely different now. Softer. Almost friendly. The kind of voice people use when they suddenly realize they've been talking to the wrong person the wrong way. He blamed previous management, said he wasn't aware of the original agreement, said they'd look into adjusting procedures, and I just listened, didn't interrupt, didn't agree, didn't argue. because at that point, words didn't matter anymore. Only actions did. And I already knew what my next move was. Because here's the reality. They weren't going to stop unless stopping cost them more than continuing. So I waited. Next, heavy snowfall came through about a week later. Thick, wet snow, the kind plows love to push around. And the moment the storm passed, I made a call. Not to a lawyer, to a marine construction crew. Now that might sound like overkill, but if you've ever dealt with waterfront property, you know these are the guys who build things that don't move. Docks, anchors, reinforced posts, stuff designed to survive ice, water, pressure, time. And within 48 hours, they were out there working along the exact surveyed boundary line near my bridge entrance. 6 steel mooring posts, each one sunk deep into the ground, filled with concrete, waist-high, solid, immovable, placed precisely where that 5-foot strip connected their emergency route to my side of the land. No signs, no warnings, just physical reality. And just like that, their access was gone. Completely. Fuel trucks? Couldn't pass. Maintenance vehicles? Blocked. Emergency route? Useless. And here's where the timing turned from good to perfect. Because this all happened 3 days before New Year's week. If you've never worked in hospitality, let me translate that for you. That's not just busy season. That's survival season. The week where high-end resorts make a huge chunk of their annual profit. Every room booked, every service running at max capacity. Everything has to be seamless. Except now it wasn't. At first, it was small things. Staff had to reroute vehicles through a longer forest access road. Added almost 2 miles to every supply run, which doesn't sound like much until you're doing it 10, 20 times a day in snow. Then it escalated. Fuel deliveries got delayed, which meant heating systems started running tighter margins, maintenance schedules got pushed, staff started cutting corners just to keep up. And then came the guests. Because luxury clients, they don't tolerate inconvenience. They expect perfection, and the moment that illusion cracks, everything unravels. One family, VIP level, 5-night Lakeview suite, arrives, and instead of a smooth check-in, their luggage has to be carried manually across a snowy stretch because vehicles couldn't reach the drop-off point efficiently anymore. That's not 5-star service. That's a problem. They canceled. Immediately. And cancellations like that? They ripple. Other guests notice. Reviews start forming before people even leave the property. Staff stress goes up. Management panic kicks in. And by that evening, my phone started ringing. Call first. Then again. Then again. Calls, texts, voicemails, the tone now completely flipped from confident to urgent. Then the owner called. Not a manager. Not a representative. The owner. And that's when you know the situation has officially crossed into "this is costing us real money" territory. Their first offer? $20,000. For permanent access. I actually laughed, not out loud, but enough that I had to pause before responding, because at that point I knew exactly what was happening. They were still negotiating based on what they thought the land was worth, not what the situation was costing them. So I said no. Simple. No explanation. No counteroffer. Just no. A day later, they came back. 40,000. Better. Still no. Because here's the thing. They were bleeding money every single day this wasn't resolved. Canceled bookings, operational inefficiencies, reputational damage, and the closer it got to New Year's, the worse it became. And I didn't need to pressure them. Tom was doing that for me. 5 days later, the tone changed again. No more lowball offers. No more casual conversations. This time it was structured, detailed, serious. $110,000. Not for ownership. For a 15-year winter access easement. Defined. Limited. Controlled. On top of that, full rebuild of my bridge, replacing the old wooden supports with reinforced steel underneath, designed to handle weight, pressure, weather. Heated snowmelt strips installed at the entrance, so no more ice buildup. Protective plow barriers, specifically engineered to prevent exactly what started this whole mess. And the part one liked most, a written penalty clause. Every single time snow touched my side of the boundary again. They pay. No arguments. No excuses. Automatic. I read through it once. Then again, let my lawyer review it, make a few adjustments, tighten the language. And when everything lined up, I signed. Just like that. No drama. No speech. No victory lap. Because the real win wasn't the money. It was the fact that the problem would never happen again. And the next time it snowed, my bridge was clear. So yeah, that's how a pile of snow turned into a six-figure deal and a fully upgraded bridge. But if you think this story is just about revenge, it's really not. Not entirely. Because what actually happened here is something way more common. Just, most people never push it far enough to see the outcome. The lesson here is, boundaries only matter when you enforce them. And I don't just mean physical boundaries, like land or fences or survey lines. I mean behavioral boundaries, the invisible lines people cross every single day because they assume you won't say anything, or worse, because they've gotten comfortable doing it for so long that they stop seeing it as crossing a line at all. That resort didn't wake up one morning and decide to mess with my property. This was years in the making, small decisions stacking on top of each other, one temporary permission turning into routine, routine turning into expectation, expectation turning into entitlement. And that's where it gets dangerous. Because entitlement doesn't feel like wrongdoing to the person benefiting from it, it feels like normal. This is a psychological trap. Once people integrate something into their system, whether it's a shortcut, a loophole, or someone else's space, they start defending it as if it belongs to them, even when it clearly doesn't. And when you challenge that, you're not just correcting behavior, you're threatening their version of reality. That's why Kyle reacted the way he did in the beginning, dismissive, borderline arrogant. Not because he was trying to be a villain, but because in his world, I was the disruption, not the other way around. And honestly, that's how a lot of conflicts escalate. Not because one side is evil and the other is right, but because both sides are operating on completely different assumptions about what's acceptable. Now, from a legal perspective, this situation could have gone very differently if I hadn't found that document. If there was no written record of temporary permission, if everything had been verbal, informal, undocumented, they might have had a real argument for continued use, especially if they could prove long-term reliance without objection. And that's the part a lot of homeowners miss. According to standard procedure, documentation isn't just paperwork, it's protection. That random agreement from 10 years ago, that was the difference between me negotiating from a position of strength and me fighting an uphill legal battle that could drag on for years. So if you own property, or even if you're renting and dealing with shared spaces, HOA rules, neighbors, whatever, always document access, always define limits, always put an end date on anything that's temporary. Because temporary, without a deadline, that's just permanent, waiting to happen. And here's another piece people don't talk about enough: timing. I didn't block their access in the middle of summer when they could easily adapt. I didn't escalate right after the first incident either. I waited until I understood the full situation, until I had leverage, and yeah, until the timing mattered. 3 days before New Year's wasn't random. That's when the pressure was highest. That's when the cost of ignoring me became bigger than the cost of working with me. And that's not revenge, that's strategy. Because at the end of the day, nobody changes behavior because you're right. They change because it becomes too expensive not to. Financially, logistically, reputationally. And once that shift happens, suddenly conversations get easier, offers get better, attitudes change real fast. Now, could I have handled this differently? Sure. I could have kept arguing with Kyle on the phone, gone back and forth, escalated emotionally, maybe even accepted that first or second offer just to make the problem go away. But that would have solved the symptom, not the system. And systems matter. Because if I had taken the quick money without fixing the structure, without setting terms, without adding penalties, I guarantee you this would have happened again. Maybe not next week, maybe not next year, but eventually. People fall back into patterns that aren't corrected. So instead, I forced a reset. Clear boundaries. Written agreement. Consequences attached. Now the rules aren't implied anymore, they're enforced. And that's the difference between hoping something won't happen again and knowing it won't. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have accepted the first offer and moved on? Would you have escalated earlier? Or would you have gone even further than I did? Because stories like this aren't really about property or snow or even money. They're about how far you're willing to go when someone keeps crossing a line you clearly drew. And more importantly, when do you decide enough is enough?